A lot of people are under the belief that the founding fathers who created this country got things right, and they were just and benevolent in their intents, only for the United States to be subverted years later and turned into a haven for political corruption. I, however, don't believe this to be the case, as I see the founding of America as a pivotal moment in the plans of the New World Order, if you want to call it that, and a successful attempt to create a new society under evil jurisdiction, if you want to look at it that way. And that's not to say that some of the founding fathers, some of the most influential figures during this period weren't acting benevolently. I'm sure some of them were. However, the overall mission came from someplace else, something more secret, just as we see going on in the world today. So let's just get into it. If you're watching this video, you most likely to some degree believe in the idea of a ruling class who supersedes politics and makes decisions or gives direction from behind the scenes through things like banking, secret societies, or globalist organizations. And a lot of you most likely believe the culprits of this conspiracy belong to one race or one religion. And while many of these individuals do hold positions of power, they are not nearly the whole story. They are merely the story on the internet today and what you've actually been programmed to hate. But that's a story for another time. That's a tale for another day. Now, this video is an attempt to shed light on the larger scope of this deep state conspiracy. Who's behind it and when did it start in regards to the American continent. I will cover the founding of the United States and the key individuals who made it happen, as well as why it happened from an esoteric perspective. A bulk of information will be presented, and probably not in a very orderly fashion. And so at the end of the video, I will try my best to summarize everything covered, give my opinion, what I'm trying to convey, and hopefully provide some clarity where things may have gotten confusing. So yeah, let's get into it. Starting with the reason America was founded. I'll explain this in two versions, the macrocosm and the microcosm. The macrocosm being the overall desire of the ruling elite for a new society, the microcosm being the details at the time of America's creation and why it happened when it did. Obviously, we all know the story of the revolution, the 3% tax, I think it was. However, there's a lot more to it than that. A lot more to it than we've been told, per usual. So to start, the macrocosm. America as the new Atlantis. Most people know Atlantis as a fictional, lost civilization, first brought up by the philosopher Plato, who described it as an ideal society, rich in knowledge and technology, that was destroyed by cataclysm, whether a flood or some sort of volcanic activity. In esoteric or occult traditions, the world, or Earth, originated in something known as the Golden Age, which was ruled by Saturn. The Golden Age is typically associated with Atlantis, which fell due to moral and spiritual corruption. Remnants of this civilization started new societies and cultures across Persia, Egypt, and even the West with the Aztecs and Mayans, all of whose culture contain a historical flood myth. Read Ignatius Donnelly's book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, or Rudolf Steiner's book, Cosmic Memory, for more information regarding the occult perspective on the history of humanity. Now, I'm not here to speculate whether this is factual history or allegorical mythology. I only bring it up to give you insight into the occult lore around this Atlantean civilization, as this is what America was destined to become, as a new version, a new Golden Age, or new Atlantis, as prophesied by the esoteric mystic and pioneer of the Rosicrucian Society, Francis Bacon. The Rosicrucians were a spiritual society founded in the 17th century in Europe, most active in England and Germany. I have an upcoming documentary on Freemasonry and the Jesuit Order that also touches on the role of the Jesuits in the creation, expansion, and direction of Rosicrucianism, but I won't go too deep into detail on that here. Just understand that the leader of the order and speculated founder, Francis Bacon, was himself an honorary Jesuit, so to speak. The Jesuits are essentially the intelligence agency of the Catholic Church. Founded in the 1500s to combat the spread of Protestantism, their role evolved into the subversion of various governments, which led them to being kicked out of over 80 different territories and countries. And they were actually completely outlawed in Europe at the time of the American Revolution. So how did they operate? Under the disguise of Freemasons and Rosicrucians. As occultist Franz Hartmann tells us, a quote from him reads, "The Jesuits gained admission into the lodges under the disguise of Rosicrucians to make Freemasonry into their tool." And if this is truly the case, it explains why the Freemasons, at the time of the American Revolution, were acting in direct interest of the Catholic Church. and we'll get into that. But back to Francis Bacon and his book, The New Atlantis. It was here he cited America as the ideal location for the fulfillment of the long-held dreams of the Rosicrucians and the esoteric adepts of antiquity. However, he doesn't actually mention America specifically or the US specifically, but most esoteric mystics, historians, have speculated and have all agreed that it was the continent of North America that he was referring to in his book. A quote from the book reads, "We sailed from Peru, where we had continued by the space of 1 whole year, finding ourselves in the midst of the greatest wilderness of waters in the world, without victual or hope of relief, and yet we made towards the northwest, that we might, if it were possible, fall upon some of the coasts of the New World." Though again, it's not officially mentioned by name, most scholars have speculated that Bacon was referring to America in this book, as the geography matches up, and the Rosicrucian presence within the US in the following years essentially confirms it. Throughout the 1600s and early 1700s, various Rosicrucians and Freemasons, some who were specifically recognized as carrying on the will of Bacon, such as those from the Royal Society of London, immigrated in mass numbers to America, settling in regions such as Philadelphia, Boston, and Williamsburg. In The New Atlantis, Bacon described the ultimate vision or achievement of this new society as Solomon's House, made up of a secret order of scientist priests who studied nature and knew divine truths, basically anyone who had been initiated into the mysteries. Now, one might compare Solomon's House to Solomon's Temple, a key piece of Masonic symbolism. One might. Who am I to say? Who am I, though, to say? I will, though, give my own interpretation of the New Atlantis, because I've read multiple books and chapters of books by various Rosicrucians and esoteric adepts alike, all of whom paint the New Atlantis in the same light, and a positive light. And it can get confusing because, it seems noble at first glance. Who wouldn't want to live in a society of this nature? Knowledge, enlightenment, morality, these virtues that they speak of. However, what this really typically implies, first of all, is a one-world government, with America being the origin of what would become a global society. Mike, how'd you come to that conclusion? That wasn't just from the New Atlantis, that's from a whole lot more research. But what comes with a one-world government is a one-world religion, a Neoplatonic religion, as well as just one ruling body, and extreme communism. Those are my own thoughts. Take that as you will. Who cares? You can call me a moron. Doesn't really matter to what we're about to learn. But to go a little bit further on it, this ruling body would be made up of, like Bacon prophesied, technological and spiritual experts, the adepts, the gatekeepers of knowledge, the initiated. Just as the old kings and queens were controlled by the priesthood of Babylon, or initiated into the mysteries of Lucius, which evolved into the pagan Roman Catholic Church, the Jesuit order, Masonry and the Rosicrucian, which Plato, who again was the first to speak of Atlantis, was an initiate of the Eleusinian mysteries, or Eleusinian. I've heard it pronounced multiple ways and seen it spelt a couple different ways. That still confuses me. So just as this has always occurred, it will occur on a global scale, starting with America. Again, I will bring up the New Atlantis and this term, the Golden Age, which was the era of Saturn. We know that these elites worship the Saturnian deity. And here's Donald Trump, whose most recent campaign contains more mention of the Golden Age than I've ever seen. Here's Elon Musk as well when Trump got elected. That reads Novus, Ordo, Seclorum, or New World Order of the Ages, a phrase that came from Rome and is on the seal of the $1 bill, and you better believe I'm going to expand on that later on. And I might as well add, in addition to Bacon's ideology that the New Atlantis would be run by experts of technology, there was an organization known as Technocracy, started in the early 1920s. The concept of technocracy was the advocacy for a one-world government ruled by an elite of technical experts. Now, who's a modern-day technical expert with his hand in everything from communication, transportation, personal data, and somehow now politics? That's correct. Yes, we're thinking here, Elon Musk. Now, it may or may not shock you to find out that Elon Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, was the research director of this technocracy movement. Again, I'll reiterate that it is important to understand that not all men who established this country were acting of ill intent. Some were serving what they believed would be a righteous and morally good establishment that would benefit all individuals, as it was laid out to them in allegory, just as a lot of Freemasons and Jesuits have no idea who really control their orders. These men had no idea what cause they were actually serving. Some did, of course, but not all, and we'll get into that. So let's get into it. So the ruling elite, which the bulk of worships Saturn and had consolidated in or around the Roman Catholic Church or the Vatican over the past 2,000 years, identified America as their future empire. However, there was one big problem, and this is the microcosm for the reason America was founded. The problem was that the Protestant Reformation, something I mentioned earlier in regards to the Jesuit order, who were meant to combat the spread of Protestantism. I won't get into the theological differences between Protestantism and Catholicism, as it means nothing in this context, as the political differences were what really mattered. Prior to Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation, Rome was the spiritual and political authority across Europe. All kingdoms paid taxes to the papacy, and monarchs even had to get their marriages approved by the Pope in order to be deemed official. Now these popes and other papal authorities governed through totalitarian rule and law verified by scripture, which the common folk were not allowed to read without Catholic clergy present, meaning the church's interpretation was the only interpretation, giving the Pope absolute authority. The hierarchy of the church was dominated by various factions, the ascetic monastics, as well as the papal bloodlines such as the Massimo, the Farnese, and others being the most prominent power, these families being Saturnian of Persian descent. When Luther started the Protestant Reformation, condemning the church and advocating for a personal relationship with Scripture, various monarchies used it as an opportunity to get away from the political dominance of the papacy. England was one of these countries. In the new American colonies, owned and controlled by English law, no Roman Catholics could vote or hold any sort of office, in an effort to prevent surrendering their country to a foreign conqueror, specifically the Pontifex Maximus, or the Pope, who Roman Catholics hold loyalty towards. When the colonial citizenry fought and won their independence from Great Britain, they established a constitution that amounted to surrendering their country to a foreign conqueror. Tupper Saucy in the book Rulers of Evil puts it best. This reads, "Consider the legalities. Before the Constitution was ratified, American Catholics had few civil rights. After ratification, they had them all. Article 6, Section 3 provides that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the authority of the United States, while the First Amendment denies Congress the power to make any law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. With Article 6, Section 3 and the First Amendment, the Constitution welcomed agents of the Pontifex Maximus, the world's chief enemy of Protestantism, into the ranks of government." So this is just one angle, one perspective on understanding the purpose of the United States of America and why the revolution happened when it did. I'll now summarize, as I don't doubt that this has been somewhat difficult to follow along, and I'm sure we'll have some Catholics watching this video that very much don't agree, but it is what it is. Amongst occult traditions, specifically the mystery traditions stemming from Babylon, moving to Greece, and eventually residing at the pinnacle of the Roman Catholic Church, which dispersed into various societies and fraternities such as the Jesuit Order, Freemasonry, and the Fraternity of the Rose Cross or the Rosicrucians, it has always been the goal to establish a society where the intellectual initiated elite rule over the many, and America was destined to be this society. However, the power that was the Vatican and its Jesuits could not accomplish this, as the Jesuits were currently outlawed and Catholics were under religious persecution in the British colonies. And so the revolution happened, creating a blank slate of a country ripe to be taken over. But enough painting the narrative, let's examine the actual facts, historical events, and the people involved, and where their loyalties lied. We've all heard of the Founding Fathers, Washington, Jefferson, whoever else. I refuse to watch Hamilton. But what we rarely hear about these Founding Fathers, and many others instrumental in the formation of the United States, is their Masonic background. Let's start with the Boston Tea Party, what many acknowledge to be the catalyst kicking off the American Revolution. On the night of December 16th, 1773, a group of men, posing as Mohawk Native Americans, boarded 3 ships, the Dartmouth, Eleanor, and Beaver, and dumped 342 chests of British tea into the Boston harbor. This was in response to the Tea Act, which allowed the British East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies without paying the usual colonial taxes, undercutting local merchants and smugglers. All of these men were members of the St. Andrew's Freemasonic Lodge in Boston. The men accessed these ships very easily because they had insider assistance, as the captain of this militia was Edward Proctor, who just so happened to also be a Freemason of St. Andrew's Masonic Lodge. The senior warden of this lodge was Paul Revere, who rented out the Green Dragon Tavern where the Boston Tea Party was planned. Another member of this lodge was John Hancock, the first man to sign the Declaration of Independence. This Declaration of Independence had a total of 56 different signers, or signees, I don't know. Would it alarm you to know that half of these men were Freemasons? I'd raise an eyebrow. However, this wasn't the case, as it was actually 50 of the 56 signers, or signees, were Freemasons. In regards to the actual revolution itself, of the major generals and brigadier generals in the Continental Army, roughly 74 individuals, over 30 are documented Freemasons, so nearly 40 to 45% of all senior officers, those giving commands. This includes men such as Major General Marquis or Marquez, de Lafayette, Marquise. He's kind of got a black name, but I assume he was not. Major General Nathaniel Greene, Major General Henry Knox, Brigadier General John Sullivan, and many more. And those are just those who are officially confirmed and documented. Many others like Charles Lee, James Clinton, and Thomas Sumter are popularly speculated to have been Freemasons, but I am not here to speculate. It's also recorded that during the Revolutionary War, mobile lodges were erected that followed the armies wherever they went. It is recorded on page 8, volume 65, number 2 from the Hawaiian Lodge Freemasons website in a PDF dedicated to the history of military lodges that, in quotes, the regimental military traveling lodge system was perpetuated in the American military forces, first by the colonial Grand Lodges and finally by the state Grand Lodges. Throughout the Revolution, the Mexican War, the Civil War in both camps, and to a lesser degree in the Spanish-American War and World War I, the military Freemason could find his brothers in a traveling military lodge in his organization. That's enough of that though. Let's transition our focus to the main man himself, George Washington, the first U.S. president of whom our capital is named after. Washington himself was a Freemason, and although publicly he was Episcopalian, he was loyal to the Roman Catholic Church and actually attended Jesuit St. Mary's Church in Philadelphia with his Masonic brother John Adams. Interesting, the church publicly claims any Catholic who dabbles in Freemasonry will be excommunicated. However, this was not the case with Washington or Adams, or any of the French aristocracy who built the foundation for what would become the most widely practiced form of Masonry, the Scottish Rite. And this is because at the peak of this society, these Freemasons served the Jesuit general and the Pontifex Maximus. However, I'll shut up because I'm covering this much more in depth in a future documentary that I have yet to finish because I'm lazy. And so this Jesuit church that Washington attended was actually the site for the first religious commemoration of the Declaration of Independence, which got signed on August 8, 1776, and just so happened to be the birthday of the Jesuit general at the time, Lorenzo Ricci, who was actually present for this ceremony. A quote from the Old St. Mary's website reads, Old St. Mary's Church was the second Roman Catholic church in Philadelphia. It was built in 1763 as a Sunday church to be used by the parishioners of Old St. Joseph's Church. It eventually became a parish in its own right. The church was prominent in the life of colonial and revolutionary Philadelphia. Old St. Mary's Church was the site of the first public religious commemoration of the Declaration of Independence. Old St. Mary Church became the first cathedral of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Philadelphia in 1810. It remained as such until 1838. Many prominent figures of colonial Philadelphia and the Revolution frequented this historic church. Members of the Continental Congress attended services here on 4 occasions from 1777 to 1781. George Washington, in an ecumenical spirit, worshipped here on at least 2 occasions. John Adams came here too and wrote to his wife Abigail. The music, consisting of an organ and choir of singers, went all the afternoon except sermon time, and the assembly chanted most sweetly and exquisitely. Here is everything that can lay hold of eye, ear, and imagination, everywhere which can charm and bewitch the simple and ignorant. I wonder how Luther ever broke the spell. This is from the U.S. Library of Congress, apparently. Now, you could take that quote as you will. I, however, view it as everywhere, he says everywhere, which can charm and bewitch the simple and ignorant, basically calling you a moron if you're a Catholic. I wonder how Luther ever broke the spell, essentially insinuating that it's a spell, it's a falsification, it's not real, but, you know. And again, that's not to say Christ or Christianity is not real, but you've fallen for a corrupt institution. But let's continue on Freemason, or should I say Roman Catholic, George Washington and his establishment of this country's capital, Washington, D.C. Washington kept close with a family in Maryland known as the Carrolls. I'll get more into them, but we must first understand the Roman Catholic history of Maryland. The region of Maryland was established by Cecilius Calvert, also known as Lord Baltimore. Fuck the Ravens though, you know, shout out my Steelers. A devout Catholic noblemen of the Calvert family. During the 1600s, the Calverts and the Jesuits dominated Maryland. Maryland, or Maryland, which was named after Mother Mary, of whom the pagan Roman Catholics incorporated into Christianity as a form of mother worship, or mother, father, and son, coming from the worship of Ishtar or Isis during the Egyptian mysteries of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, or the Babylonian mysteries of Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. So Maryland essentially became the Catholic haven in Britain. When the first settlers landed in 1634, the ships Ark and Dove carried 2 Jesuit priests, Father Andrew White and Father John Altham. They established plantations and manors, and by 1700, estimates suggest Jesuits directly or indirectly owned nearly 1/10 of all cultivated land in Maryland, making them the largest private landholders after the Calvert family, who again were Roman Catholic. So that's the Catholic history of Maryland. Fast forward to the time when America was founded, and another prominent Catholic family in this region was the Carrolls, who I previously mentioned as being associates of George Washington. The 3 key members of the family were John Carroll, Daniel Carroll, and Charles Carroll, all of whom were Roman Catholic. Charles Carroll signed on the Declaration of Independence. Daniel Carroll played a key role in the creation of Washington, D.C., which I'll expand on very soon, and John Carroll was a Jesuit priest, and also the first Catholic bishop in the United States. He also founded the Jesuit College of Georgetown, which has served as the top institution of Jesuit education in America since. At the time of the country's founding, the Jesuits were currently banned in Europe, but the new articles of the Constitution allowed them to subtly continue their efforts in the U.S., mainly from Maryland and Virginia. Now let's look at Daniel Carroll and the establishment of Washington, D.C. Carroll was also a signer of both the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution. He was Jesuit educated with his brother at St. Omer's College. Carroll was one of 3 men assigned to the Board of Commissioners by Washington himself, tasked with creating the new capital. This board was specifically responsible for marking the boundaries of the federal district, purchasing or accepting deeds for the land, as well as laying out the city plan. The other 2 men were Thomas Johnson, the former mayor of Maryland and a Freemason himself, and David Stewart, who had married into the previously mentioned powerful Catholic Calvert bloodline. The men had to acquire various plots of land in order to create the capital. This land had been predominantly Roman Catholic. A lot of this land would also not be purchased by the federal government. It was to be donated, while partial ownership remained with what was left over. The key parts of this land included Carrollsburg, a tract owned by Notley Young, a relative of the Carrolls, and Duddington Manor, owned by Daniel Carroll, as well as the land of Benjamin Odin, another Roman Catholic. As we continue down the list of tasks for the Board of Commissioners, we'll examine the layout that was determined for the new capital. The commissioners worked with a tight-knit group of individuals to plan and execute the design of Washington, D.C., including Pierre Charles L'Enfant, the original city planner and designer, a Freemason of the Holland Lodge in New York City, who was also a Roman Catholic, another contradiction to the idea that the Vatican opposes Freemasonry. Andrew Ellicott and Benjamin Banneker were responsible for the astronomical precision that aligned the White House with solar risings. The architect of the U.S. Capitol's interior, Benjamin Latrobe, was a member of the Royal Society of London, who I previously mentioned as being a group dedicated to the fulfillment of Francis Bacon's New Atlantis prophecy. I'll now take the opportunity to point out some of the esoteric symbolism and themes across the design and construction of the Capitol. A lot of this I'm sure you've probably seen on Instagram, TikTok, X, whatever, through imagery, Masonic imagery, specifically in the planning of the street design layout. I won't get too in depth on it here. I'll just give a list of the things. Starting with the street layout, designed by previously mentioned Freemason Pierre Charles L'Enfant, which without any streets looks like this. When displayed like this, we can see the upside down pentagram and the Masonic square and compass. When displayed like this, we can see the Star of David, also known as the Star of Remphan, and the Seal of Solomon. The Hermetic depiction of as above so below, or the combination of the feminine and masculine energies. In DC at the White House, you'll find a dome, which represents the feminine lunar energy. Not too far away, you'll find the Washington Monument, which itself represents the masculine solar energy and the phallic creative power. Standing 555 feet tall, with a foundational depth of 111 feet, reducing to 9 in numerology with a total of 666. And you know what they say, every new capital needs a good ceremony. They say it somewhere, I'm not sure where, I might have just made it up, maybe I dreamt it. And you can leave it to the Freemasons to ensure that it happens. On September 18th, 1973, the ceremony for the new capital took place at the Capitol Grill. No, sorry, at Capitol Hill. Organized, I find that a lot funnier than it is. Organized by the Grand Masonic Lodge of Maryland, Washington presided in full Masonic regalia, wearing his Masonic apron, sash, and jewel. The procession moved through the half-finished streets of D.C., led by Washington and the commissioners carrying the ceremonial cornerstone. When they arrived at the site, Washington performed the traditional Masonic cornerstone ceremony. So by now, it should be clear that the creation of the United States hinged on the efforts of the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and the Roman Catholics and Jesuits. Scottish Rite Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism can also be traced back to the creation efforts of Catholicism, despite what the church publicly proclaims and what the orders themselves proclaim. And again, I'm going to touch on this in depth. You don't have to take my word for it. I do have a longer video about that coming up. But forget about that. We're going to examine more of the symbolism, or should I say mythology, associated with the creation of the new empire. We've already examined the occult significance of the actual structures and buildings, but let's continue a bit deeper. This is the symbol of which I'm sure you're familiar on the $1 bill. Here we can see two phrases, the first being Annuit Cœptis. The term Annuit Cœptis is Latin, I'm probably not saying it right, derived from the writings of Virgil, dated between 30 and 19 BCE. The phrase was used in the context of a prayer to Jupiter. Jupiter, omnipotens, adabecius annue Cœptis, meaning all-powerful Jupiter, favor my bold undertakings. Author Tupper Saucy, in his book Rulers of Evil, states, the fact that the national state house evolved as a capital bespeaks Roman influence. No building can rightly be called a capital unless it is a temple of Jupiter, the great father god of Rome, who ruled heaven with his thunderbolts and nourished the earth with his fertilizing rains. If it was a Capitolium, it belonged to Jupiter and his priests. Jupiter's mascot was the eagle, which the founding fathers made their mascot as well. A Roman eagle tops the governing idol of the House of Representatives, a 46-inch sterling, silver, and ebony wand called a mace. The mace is the symbol of authority in the House. When the sergeant at arms displays it before an unruly member of Congress, the mace restores order. Its position at the rostrum tells whether the House is in committee or in session. America's national motto, Annuit Cœptis, came from a prayer to Jupiter. It appears in Book 11 of Virgil's epic propaganda, the Ennead, a poem commissioned just before the birth of Christ by Caius Mecaenas, the multi-billionaire power behind Augustus Caesar. The poem's objective was to fashion Rome into an imperial monarchy for which its citizens would gladly sacrifice their lives. Fascism may be an ugly word to many, but its stately emblem is apparently offensive to no one. The emblems of fascism, a pair of them, commands the wall above and behind the speaker's rostrum in the chamber of the House of Representatives. They're called fasces, or fasces, and I got plantar fasciitis, and I can think of no reason for them to be there other than to declare the fascistic nature of American Republican democracy. A fasces is a Roman device. The other phrase on the dollar bill, Novus Ordo Seclorum, also comes from the writings of Virgil in his Eclogue, written in 40 BC. Written during the transition from the Roman Republic to the rule of Augustus Caesar. The Eclogue was the prophecy for a new empire, while the Ennead was Jupiter promising its fulfillment. It is stated in the Ennead, I don't know how to say it, in regards to Augustus Caesar, here is Caesar, and all the line of Julius, all who shall one day pass under the dome of the great sky. This is the man, this one of whom so often you have heard the promise, Caesar Augustus, son of the deified, who shall bring once again an age of gold to Latium, the land where Saturn reigned in early times. He will extend his power beyond the Garaments and Indians, over far territories north and south of the zodiacal stars, the solar way. So that's Novus Ordo Seclorum, basically written in the same context as Annuit Cœptis. Here again is Novus Ordo Seclorum, tweeted by Elon Musk, who also tweeted this symbol of Saturn, and the Golden Age, tweeted in regards to Trump, who continuously speaks about the Golden Age when elected and during his campaign. Trump, Jesuit educated at Fordham, sent all of his children to Jesuit universities. It should all be lining up, hopefully. Like the stars, man. Constellations, Orion's belt, it should all be lining up. Now, although I've briefly touched on the significance of the eagle and its relation to Jupiter, well, I didn't really touch on it. Tupper Saucy touched on it. I touched on him touching on it. I think that was Trump's defense in regards to Epstein touching children. He was just a friend of a friend. I'm going to share another esoteric perspective on the bird brought to you by Manly P. Hall. Hall states in his book, The Secret Destiny of America, that when the time came to select an appropriate emblem for the Great Seal of the United States of America, several designs were submitted. These are described by Galliard Hunt in The History of the Seal of the United States, published in Washington, D.C. in 1909. Most of the designs originally submitted had the phoenix bird on its nest of flames as the central motif, or motif. I think it's motif. Hall continues in this chapter stating, the phoenix, it was said, lives for 500 years, and at its death, its body opens and the newborn phoenix emerges. Because of this symbolism, the phoenix is generally regarded as representing immortality and resurrection. Now, could this be a notion that this was a resurrection of the Golden Age of Atlantis that transitioned from the Roman Empire and was now once again resurrecting? I believe so, especially when modern day elite scientists, technocrats like Elon Musk, are paying homage to the motto and Jesuit Trump gets elected for a second time as the 47th president, which is a very revered number in Freemasonry. But of course, do your own research, come to your own conclusions, don't listen to anybody on the internet, including myself. And with that, I'll conclude this video with a brief summary, which goes as such. When studying the individuals involved and the surrounding context at the time of the American Revolution, it becomes clear to the esoteric researcher that this occurrence was no accident and was a carefully constructed and executed plan by the esoteric fraternities at the time, the Society of the Rose Cross or Rosicrucian Order, as well as the Freemasons, both working with or for the benefit of the Roman Catholic Church and the Pontifex Maximus to create a new empire under the control of Rome. This is the first long-form video I'm uploading, so I'm not too sure how to end it. Follow me on Instagram. I'm making a new TikTok as well. That should be in the description since I have been banned there. Subscribe here, and also my research community is now available to join as well. It's not currently complete, but there's a massive and still growing occult library with books on conspiracy and esoteric concepts A to Z, as well as a course I created on lucid dreaming, which I can guarantee can help you achieve your first lucid dream in 3 weeks. And learn how to control and utilize them for your benefit. So if that interests you and you want to support my research, you can do so there. You can also use that community to chat with me directly or with other members. I'm constantly uploading my own research blogs and more sources and things you'll find interesting if you're into this stuff, and more bonus videos and courses coming soon as well. Go follow me on Twitch too. I'm going to start streaming consistently, hopefully every day. But I'm just yapping. At this point, I'll shut up. Again, subscribe, I guess. And yeah, thank you for watching and hopefully enjoying.